Hey you guys, welcome back to the salon. So every now and then I do kind of like a day where I'll do like a horror double feature. Now a lot of times I will just generally like pick two movies at random, like ones that I've heard were good that I haven't got around to seeing. And sometimes those two movies end up being like just completely not having anything to do with one another. But sometimes I pick two movies kind of like at random, like I said, and watch them together. And they end up being sort of thematically similar, which is what happened with the double feature that I'll be discussing today. This particular double feature consists of two kind of mind-bending sort of movies, which, like I said, I wasn't really aware of when I was first going in because, as I mentioned on some of my other videos, I don't really like to know a lot about a movie before I go into watching it. Sometimes I'll just go by recommendations. Other horror fans say this one is good, so you should check it out, and I don't really try to like learn too much about what it's about or anything like that because I like to come to things fresh. But these two particular movies ended up being, again, very mind-bending, utilizing kind of aspects of time displacement and multiverses to kind of fashion these real unsettling narratives that are actually like really, really creepy, and also, you know, gives the part of your brain that pretends that it understands quantum mechanics a little bit of a workout as well. So the first movie I want to discuss in this regard is the 2009 British-Australian co-production, which is called Triangle. Now, this was written and directed by Christopher Smith. The movie actually starts out as a pretty straightforward, I guess like a disaster at sea type of film, like a thriller like that. But it very, very quickly goes off in some pretty strange directions. Now, if you haven't seen the two movies that I'm discussing today, I would recommend going to watch them before you watch this video because I'm not going to like lay out the entire plot, but I am actually going to spoil some of the plot points. So this is your warning. You have been warned. If you haven't seen these two movies, then go watch them unless you don't care if they get spoiled. So again, final warning. So in this movie, we have Melissa George, the actress, playing Jess, and she's a woman who has an autistic son named Tommy. Now, at the beginning of the movie, she's apparently made some plans to go sailing with a friend slash potential love interest of hers, whose name is Greg, and some other buddies of his. But when she kind of gets to the harbor, like prior to setting sail, because they said, oh, we're going to meet this morning and we're going to go out on the trip, Greg finds it a little bit weird that her son Tommy isn't with her. And she also kind of seems a little bit out of it, like, you know, acting a little bit strange, like she doesn't exactly know what's going on. They ask her where Tommy is, and she says that he's at school. And this kind of strikes everyone as a tad odd because it's Saturday. But, you know, everyone's just kind of like, okay, I guess so. Maybe she dropped him off at some school program or something like that. So they don't like really question it any further, even though they think it's a little bit strange. So her and all the other friends venture forth out into the sea, like for their trip. Not too long into the journey, though, they get a bizarre distress signal over the radio. And then there's a freak storm that comes up and causes the sailboat to capsize. One of the friends who's on the trip, whose name is Heather, seemingly gets swept away and drowns. We don't really see, but they're just presuming because, you know, that's what happens. But the others manage to climb aboard the overturned hull of the sailboat. Now, luckily for them, or so it first appears, a cruise liner soon happens by. And the survivors are all jacked about this, as you would be, even though they try to like, call for help, like for the people on the cruise ship, and there really doesn't seem to be any answer. Now, all they see is like a brief glimpse of like a shadowy person, like way, way up on the cruise ship, and they just like see them from far away, and they don't answer or anything like that. So it's like really far up on the deck. But, you know, regardless, whatever, rescue is rescue. They're in trouble. So the group of friends like pull up alongside the ship and they climb aboard. So far, so good. Like I said, like a disaster at sea type movie. Here's where it starts to get weird though, because eerily, the entire cruise liner appears to be completely deserted. Even though when they find the ballroom, there's a big table and it's laden down with like fresh food, as though everybody was just there and they're like setting up for the big like dinner meal or whatever. So the protagonist, very confused, as you would be, they start searching the ship for any sign of human habitation. As they're doing this, like all kind of creepy little details, I really loved this part of the movie because, like I said, I wasn't sure what was going on. So the fact that you come up upon like a completely abandoned cruise ship that looks like everybody was just there, like everything looks like it's in working order, and then like there's all these weird little clues and stuff like that, I was just like, what the fuck is going on here? You know what I mean? So it was like a really good, it really like pulled you into the story because this whole mystery, and you're trying to like figure out what's going on. So Jess, our main character, she actually thinks that she sees or hears somebody walking around. The first thing she thinks is, oh, maybe Heather, you know, the girl that had been like swept away and presumably drowned earlier on when the ship first capsized. They're like, oh, well, maybe she survived and she was able to like swim to the ship and she got here before us. So they thought that it was her. Another thing that Jess has, though, is that she starts feeling this really, really powerful sense of deja vu. Like, she'll come around the corner and she seems to know where all of the corridors are going to lead and like where everything is on the ship, even though, you know, ostensibly she's never been on this ship before. Most disconcertingly, the group also finds Jess's keys lying on the ground in a part of the ship that they know that they haven't explored yet. So again, you're just kind of like, what the fuck is going on here? As the investigation continues, though, not only does the gang discover a message telling them to go to the ballroom, and this message is written in what appears to be blood, like on a bathroom mirror, but later on, even more alarmingly, the group is set upon by a very murderous person. He's wearing like a burlap sack over their head, like I think like with eyes cut out and stuff. And this person starts like picking them off one by one. In a very perplexing twist, Greg is shot, and he survives, but like when the other people are like, what the fuck happened? He says, Jess shot me. And Jess comes in there and she's like, what the fuck are you talking about? I didn't shoot you. And incidents kind of like continue along this line until you, the viewer watching the movie, starts to figure out, she starts to kind of like get a handle on what's happening in this fucking ship. And like I said, spoiler alert, because I'm going to tell you like what's happening on the ship. So in essence, Jess and her friends have unwittingly become involved in some sort of a time loop from which it seems that they can't escape. The situation that they find themselves in, interestingly, is actually kind of foreshadowed near the beginning of the film, because a statement that Jess made earlier about her son Tommy, who, remember I said had autism, and she says that his autism often manifests itself to like a rigid adherence to routine, and any deviance from that routine causes him intense like emotional distress. So you're kind of, it's almost kind of like that, the statement that she made there is like foreshadowing of like this loop that she falls into like later on. There's also some reference to the myth of Sisyphus, you know, the guy that kept like pushing the rock up and then it kept like falling back down, you know, just like over and over again. And it kind of goes along where Jess tries to, like, once she realizes that she's inside a time loop and she's like all of this stuff is happening over and over again, she's sort of like gets increasingly desperate to try to vary the script like each and every go around in this sort of like ultimately futile attempt to get herself and her friends out of this loop. And as the movie goes on, you find out that this loop has actually been going on for far longer than the movie first led you to believe. In actually this one scene, which, you know, which is amazing when it actually like hits you the realization like how long this loop has been going on. And it likely started like way before you, the viewer, were aware of it. You know what I'm saying? So as I mentioned, I didn't have any idea like where this movie was going when I first started watching it. So as it started to get like weirder and weirder, I became like more and more intrigued and invested because I'm like, oh my God, what the fuck is happening here? This is like crazy. Like all of this, yeah, like all the stuff that's happening is like completely crazy. And in particular, I think the scenes of Jess trying to, I guess, sort of like vary the program and still getting the same results like every single time were really kind of like gut-wrenching, as it sort of like spoke to the hopelessness of her situation, intimating that really whatever choices she made would lead to the exact same result, which to me, I mean, the narrative of that is just like really, really bleak by any stretch of the imagination. But in the context of the story, it works like brilliantly well. And particularly in light of the revelations at the end of what ended up really happening to Tommy, like where she was, like where he was, you know what I mean? Like at the beginning when they asked where he is and, oh, he's at school, and she seemed like out of it. So when they tell you like what happened to him, and they kind of show, you know, flashback, you kind of understand more of why she ended up in this particular Mobius strip, like this particular time loop that she ended up in, and why perhaps she can't get out of it until she does a particular thing. So yeah, this movie, if you haven't seen it, like I said, it's, you know, it's not old, but it's 2009, and I actually kind of saw it a little bit late. I just kept seeing like a lot of people recommending it, and I was like, okay, well, I need to get around to that. I believe it's free on Tubi at the moment. And yeah, the movie is a mindfuck for sure. If you're into stuff like, you know, like Donnie Darko or Memento or something like that, you'd probably like really dig this as well. Anything that's kind of like about time loops. It's not really a standard horror movie, I guess. Like, it is pretty violent, and, you know, it's the implications of it are actually horrific. So I guess in that sense, like, it's a lot more like a horror movie. But I mean, as I said, I think the implications were the most terrifying thing about it. And because it took a while to like reveal actually what was going on, the mystery just kept getting deeper and deeper, so you really kept getting like sucked into the story. And once you kind of figured out what was going on, it just became kind of like more and more horrifying and more heartbreaking as you realized, you know, everything that she was doing to try to bust out of this time loop, and how like everything that she would do like would still end up at the same place, and how it was like really hopeless. But I was like really into that like tone, you know what I mean? So yeah, I would definitely recommend this film. Incidentally, the writer-director Christopher Smith, he had also made another excellent film back in 2006 called Severance, which is actually like a horror comedy, which is very, very good. And he also made, in 2010, he made an action horror movie called Black Death. So he's made like some other things, like he's made some other movies too, but I just mentioned those because I've actually seen those two, and they're also very good. So I would recommend those as well. So the second film, and another film that uses kind of like a similar concept, but this movie came out in 2013, and this is a sci-fi horror movie called Coherence. Now, this was the feature film directorial debut of a guy named James Ward Burkett. Now, he was previously best known as the concept artist on the first three Pirates of the Caribbean movies. I believe he was also the co-writer on the script of Rango. It's Rango, right? Yeah, that movie. And I think he also directed a couple of short films, like kind of in the Pirates of the Caribbean universe, but this is kind of like the horror movie that he's best known for. And I will say that I think one of the best things about this movie is it just goes to show what a talented individual or group of individuals can do with pretty much nothing but a really good concept. And, you know, I have to say, like, a group of very, very gifted improv actors, because I think that really did, like, bring a lot to the table on this one. And again, I'm going to pretty much spoil a lot of things that happen. So if you haven't seen it, then please go watch it. Or you can continue watching this if you don't care that I spoil some of the plot points. So Coherence was actually shot over 5 days in Burkett's own house with essentially a nothing budget, no crew, and essentially no script. So the movie is actually the tale of a dinner party gone astronomically awry, and I mean that in the most literal sense. So what happens, it's 8 friends, and they sort of converge on the home of one of the couples, and they, you know, do regular dinner party shit. They're like drinking wine, shooting the shit. They're, you know, talking over one another in a very naturalistic sort of way. As I said, a lot of this was improv, so it's very much like a real dinner party. At first, you know, they're just having a good time. There is little indication that anything is amiss, other than a few brief mentions of a comet that happens to be passing unusually close to the Earth that night, and the fact that somebody brings up kind of jokingly, oh, maybe there'll be all these weird like anomalies that will be occurring in its wake. There is also seemingly one minor incident early on in the party where the glass on one cell phone belonging to the main character, Emily, cracks for no reason. And also the phone of another one of the guests, whose name is Hugo, the glass on his cell phone breaks as well, like almost at the same time, which seems a little weird, so they point that out. Now, Hugo, his brother, is a physicist, and he has kind of given him the heads up that some weird shit might be happening tonight because of the comet going by. Like, there might be some kind of, like, weird space-time anomalies and all this other kind of stuff. But like I said, it's pretty slow. Like, they just kind of, like, mention that at the beginning. And like I said, just kind of make a joke about it as you would in real life. So this get-together, as I mentioned, is progressing in a normal enough way. Relationship drama and sort of, like, angst, seething just under the surface of all the pleasant conversation, just some little passive-aggressive digs here and there, like at any dinner party where alcohol is involved. But then power goes out. They're all kind of startled, but not particularly alarmed, like I said, as you wouldn't be. The friends look out the window and notice that the entire street has gone dark, except for one house, like a couple blocks away, which is still lit up like a Christmas tree. So thinking that this house might have still have a working phone, because the phones are out as well, or an internet connection, a couple of the friends decide, well, they're just going to trek on over there, like a couple blocks to that house, and see what's going on. Like, why do they have power and nobody else does? Maybe they have a generator. Let's, figure it out. And then right here is where things begin to go wildly off the rails. When the two people come back, the intrepid explorers, when they come back from this lit up house, they have quite a story to tell. They say to the other people, guess what? That other house is essentially a mirror image of the one we are in right now, complete with other versions of everybody else at this party. That would really be something else if they came back and told you that. Obviously, everyone kind of thinks they're kidding at first. They're like, no, we're totally serious. They're like, and look, while we were there, we stole this metal box from the other house. Inside the metal box, there's a whole bunch of seemingly random items in there, and there's a bunch of photographs of all the people at the party, because that's the thing. Like, when the explorers went over there, they're like, okay, well, people aren't going to believe this shit, so we have to, take something. And this thing had photographs of all the people at that party, which is also photographs of them. The photographs all have, again, what seems to be meaningless numbers written on the back of the photos, and they have no idea what the fuck to make of all this. Now, over the course of the story, both the protagonists and the person watching the movie come to realize that essentially what's happened is that the comet passing over has caused sort of like a rift in space-time, or in the multiverse, or whatever. And that now there is at least one other house, and perhaps, it's implied, an infinity of other houses, containing alternate universe versions of all the party guests. There is, at first, no way to tell which people were in the house originally, and which ones are quote-unquote imposters from one of the other similar but slightly different universes, okay? Because they all look exactly alike. Also, somewhere in the neighborhood, there's sprung up a dark zone, which seems to be a way station between the realities. And as the movie goes on and more kind of switcheroos occur, paranoia starts to set in. For example, this character had a cloth band-aid on his head when he left, but now it's a plastic one. That character has a red glow stick when all the original group had blue ones. So now they don't really know. Now there's people from other universes, and there's really kind of no way of telling, and they're starting to freak out and panic. Now, the first thing that they think is that maybe the one woman who was the fun woman of the party, I guess, she actually had brought ketamine to the party. So the first thing everybody thinks is blaming her. She's like, you fucking dosed us. This isn't actually happening, but you dosed us and we didn't know. And now we're having all these kind of hallucinations and shit like that. But once they kind of get past that and start to actually figure out what's actually going on, they start coming up, some of them start coming up with sort of extreme ideas of what they should do about their counterparts in the other directions, other dimensions, because they're like, hey, that's not the real me. I'm the real me. I think it kind of comes to a thing where, well, yeah, but the ones in the other universes are probably thinking the same thing about you, which is pretty much essentially what happens. No, I'm the real one. That's the imposter. So you're kind of getting that kind of situation. Like I said, and the paranoia is ramping up and up. They're also kind of talking about, is there any possible way like to get stuck in a reality that you start out in, because it's like, what if one of us is over at that house and then, you know, the alternate dimension thing like crashes back into itself and I end up over in this reality, which is slightly different. And, you know, that wasn't the one I started out in. So some stuff is going to be unfamiliar. So everybody was like starting to freak out about that as well. Now, I have to say, when I read about how this movie was made, I admit that I almost could not believe it. So the director, like I said, James Ward Burkett, he spent more than a year laying out all the plot points and twists and making like these big elaborate charts of how all this complicated story was going to play out, because it is like a pretty complicated story. But he did all that like preparation. But because he wanted the performances of the actors to be as believable as possible, he actually recruited friends of his and acquaintances who didn't actually know one another, but were all like very, very accomplished at improv. And also, Burkett deliberately did not tell the actors what the movie was about. Like, he didn't tell them like the grand overarching scheme. He didn't show them the charts or anything like that. He simply gave them a single page of notes on each day of shooting, which told them what their character was supposed to do that day, and that's about it. He also encouraged the actors like not to share their pages with one another, because he wanted everything to be like as naturalistic as possible. So you just knew what your character was supposed to do that day. You didn't know what everyone else was doing. You didn't know what was going on. So all the reactions of the characters that you see in the film are absolutely genuine, because they were all as surprised as everyone else was. They had no idea where the movie was going. They had no idea what the other characters were up to or anything like that. You know, none of them had any idea of the notes the other ones were given or what the outcome of the story is ultimately going to be. And I think that really, really worked in this movie's favor, because like I said, all the reactions are absolutely like naturalistic and genuine, and you can tell as they start like figuring out what's going on, you know, it just kind of gets like more and more like intense, like the paranoia gets more intense. I mean, it gives the movie like this real immediacy and this real realism. There's this whole natural progression from this sort of like jokey disbelief at first, like I said, just like it would be in real life, to essentially like paranoid terror, you know what I mean, as the bizarre events start to unfold. So I found this whole movie like completely riveting, like from start to finish. I mean, creepy incidents start piling up, and the implications of the time loop or the time distortion, whatever it is, start bearing fruit. Everyone starts getting more and more paranoid. Who are you? I'm the real me. Like, you came from that other place. You have a different, you know, you have a little bit of blood on your collar, and you didn't when you left, and everybody's trying to like make excuses, and it's like, it's crazy. I mean, the fact that the whole film too is, because I think I forgot to mention this, is set in a couple of rooms in a house. You don't really see the outside all that much. You don't see the other house. You don't see anything like that. You basically just see these few rooms where this dinner party is taking place. And I mean, given how vast the story is in its mechanics, the fact that it's set in essentially like 2 rooms is pretty amazing, and a testament to really like the prodigious talent of the director, as well as, you know, the improvisational skills of the actors, who are all like incredible. I mean, this one has gotten so many awards since it came out in 2013, and deservedly so. I really do wish that Burkett would do more stuff. As far as I know, like I said, this is kind of his main film. He works on other big movies as well, but this is his like main directorial movie, and it's just so good. You know, I mean, he made this amazing movie like out of, again, nothing. It was just like no crew, no nothing. He just shot the whole thing, and actually it looks like really beautiful as well. You would never know that there was no crew, that he was essentially the whole crew. So I would recommend this movie like unreservedly if you're into dinner party horror, particularly if you liked the 2016 movie The Invitation, which is actually one of my favorites from the 21st century. Superficially similar to that, at least like in the setup and at least in the real slow buildup of suspense. The Invitation actually goes in a completely different direction. It doesn't have anything to do with sci-fi or anything, but just like the first part of it is very similar. I'd also recommend it if you're real into like Twilight Zone kind of stuff, because it is kind of like a Twilight Zone sort of concept. Or if you liked the 2004 movie Primer, you know, this is kind of along those same lines. I think this was easier to understand than Primer, you know, so, but if you like that kind of thing, like time distortion, multiverses, alternate dimensions, that kind of stuff, but done like in a real grounded sort of way, then this is actually like a really, really terrific movie, and I would really recommend it. This might be on Tubi as well, but I'm not entirely sure. I know Triangle is, or at least it was like a couple days ago when I checked. This one might be, but if it's not, I'm sure it's streaming somewhere else. But yeah, both of these, if you're really into like mindfuck, time loop, alternate dimension type stuff, then both of these are absolutely worth your time, and I would recommend the both, again, like unreservedly. So that will do it for this double feature. Be sure to like, share, subscribe to the Scare Salon, and I will see you guys on the next video. Bye.